Welcome to our final module, Module 8, in our course Introduction to Windows Server 2019. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about server and performance monitoring in Windows Server. You've got to not only make sure your Windows Server is running properly today, but also you have to think about Windows Server down the road, maybe a year from now, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, because things do change over time. Windows updates happen, hardware gets old, and if you're using Windows and if you're using Azure for virtual machines in the cloud, then you also have to keep an eye out for what the costs are as those change over time as well. So there's different types of management that we can do, such as monitoring processes, performance. We can monitor our users, details, and services. Performance Monitor. This is a great tool that's come all the way back with Windows Server 2000, and you can use Microsoft Management Console simply by running MMC from a command prompt and then add in the Performance Monitor snap-in. You can also get to Performance Monitor directly by opening up Server Manager and just going to the Tools menu and opening up Performance Monitor. And there's other ways as well. This gives us a visual display of how things are going with Windows performance. And you can set up all different types of counters that not only are part of Microsoft, but any third-party utilities that you're using. Let's say you decide you want to add in a third-party backup program because Windows Server backup doesn't have all the features that you want. Well, you can do that, and it automatically adds in the monitors for whatever backup program you're using into Performance Monitor, so you can monitor how many resources it's using, how it's doing as an application, is it having any issues, and things like that. So you've got performance counters, data collector sets, and monitor reports. So the performance counters monitor live what's happening with whether it's software or hardware or the operating system. It tells what's going on right now with whatever it is that you choose to add in as a snap-in. The data collector sets, those are collecting data over a long period of time. So if you want to see how things are running over the course of a day or a week or whatever it is, then you can collect that data into a text file, and then it will go ahead and show that to you graphically when it's done right inside Performance Monitor. And you also have Performance Monitor reports, which gives you more like a web version report of what's been happening with performance on your server. Reliability Monitor is a little bit different. So what this is, it monitors hardware and software during a particular time interval. And it assigns a number called the stability index, and it's going to indicate the server's reliability. So it ranges from 1 to 10. So 1 is the least and 10 is the most stable. So by using that index, administrators can kind of tell whether that server is having issues or not. Now, it's rare you're going to see a 10 because it's always going to find something wrong. But that doesn't mean that it's not stable. So as long as it's in the 6 to 8 range, then you're probably just fine. Event Viewer is what I have used over the decades for monitoring servers more than any other troubleshooting type of tool. So no matter what happens on your server, an event is created. Event Viewer is so important that if Event Viewer stopped working, stopped collecting logs, the server would crash. It wouldn't work right. So that's how important Event Viewer is. It's got to constantly be collecting, creating, and presenting logs to you to review. Now, if you decide not to look at them, that's up to you. But whenever I have any kind of a problem, or even when I don't, even when I just want to check to see how the servers are doing, I'll go into the Event Viewer and I'll open up some of the various different event logs that will tell me whether or not I'm having a problem. And if I am having a problem, then it will tell me the error code that goes along with it, which I can then research and then solve that issue. And you can get there by going to Server Manager, Tools, and choosing Event Viewer. There's other ways as well. You can look at it in Windows Admin Center. You can look at it in Microsoft Management Console. And you can also look at logs directly through PowerShell. If you're in a smaller organization or mid-sized organization, then Event Viewer is a great way to see how things are going. However, if you're in a large enterprise, you can use a tool inside the Microsoft System Center suite of tools called Operations Manager. And Operations Manager is going to give you a much deeper view of what's happening with your server than just simple event logs. And you can collect multiple different servers and display them all in Operations Manager's application. Windows Admin Center is a great way that you can monitor things that are going on. It is the web-based console that you can run on any client or any server and connect to any client or any server in your network. And you can even add in Azure servers as well if you'd like. And you can use Windows Admin Center to look at event logs, and you can use them to look at other tools that come with it, such as Performance Monitor as well. When you run Windows Admin Center after the installation, it's going to create its own self-signed certificate, which generally is going to cause an error in your web browser. However, you can replace that self-signed certificate with either a public certificate that you purchase or an Active Directory Certificate Services certificate that you trust through group policy. So any way you want to do it is just fine. Once you're in the Admin Center, then you can add in servers, PCs, failover clusters, and you can also add in Azure devices as well. Now, inside Admin Center, you're going to see a lot of good tools that are included in there, just like they are in Windows Server itself, such as Server Manager, Computer Management to take a look at your drives and event logs and other things like that, Cluster Creation, and Cluster Manager. So you can manage a cluster remotely from one of your computers, such as a Windows 10 or 11 computer, and you can create the cluster, you can delete the cluster, you can make changes to the cluster as well. And you can see other things that you can also manage, such as certificates, containers, devices, anything you don't see inside the Windows Admin Center web browser site. Then you can go and add in what's called an extension. So for instance, the certificates may not be something that just shows up in Windows Admin Center, but you know it has certificate services installed on it. So you can go into the extensions, which is in the settings area, add in the extensions for certificates, and then you can go ahead and start managing them. And that goes true with a lot of other tools that you can use to manage a server that may or may not be included in Windows Admin Center by default. You can also use Windows Admin Center to use and configure DHCP and DNS, but using it through a web browser is not quite as convenient as using it through an application. So it's going to be a little bit slower. It's going to have some features missing. So Windows Admin Center is not always the best for everything. However, what is nice about it is you can use it to manage Active Directory and your servers from any computer, and not just while you're on site. You can also configure it so you can manage it remotely by logging in if you forward the ports properly from the internet through your firewall directly to your server. And of course, you're going to want to lock down what IP addresses can access it, just so you don't have people trying to constantly hack that site. System Insight is only available on Windows Server 2019, as well as newer versions like 2022. It uses this machine learning model to find out what the performance is like, and it gives you this predictive future type of insights, such as through AI would possibly do. And it tries to tell you ahead of time if you're going to need more RAM or more CPU or more storage, things like that, or if it's going to predict any type of failure as well. Microsoft has this great suite of tools that are free online at Microsoft.com called sysinternals. Sysinternals was basically a project by various different people within Microsoft's help desk. And so they noticed that many of the clients kept calling about the same things over and over. And so what some of the smart people did there is they created their own tools to help out those users so they could solve their problems more quickly and easily. And then enough tools got created, and Microsoft made them available for free online. So sysadmins, they can go ahead and download all these different tools and use them. Now, I've used many of these sysinternals applications and utilities over the years to solve all kinds of different problems, as well as perform different tasks, such as I was able to convert physical operating systems into virtual machines. Is a great tool for that. I've also used some of the tools that you see here as well. A baseline is something that not all sysadmins use, but they really should. A baseline, what it basically does is it goes in to something like Performance Monitor. It creates a collector set or uses one of the other available tools, and it creates a baseline of what is being used, how much RAM is being used, how much storage is being used, how many CPU cycles, various other things that you would see in Performance Monitor. And you save that information as a collector set, and then you come back to that same server 3 months or 6 months or a year later, and you run it again, and you check to see what kind of drift that you're going to have from your original baseline to what it's showing after that period of time. And if you see a significant amount of drift as far as resource usage goes, then it may be time to upgrade that server or even move some of the services on it off to another server. Trend analysis is part of that baseline that you're going to be using, the baseline to start with, and then what's happened over time. So that performance data over time is very important. It can also help you reduce the amount of servers that you may need as well, because you might find some servers that are being underutilized and some that are being overutilized, and you can balance that equation between those servers. Capacity planning is something that can be very difficult for individuals, and it's really left better for larger teams of people to figure out. So what it does is it says, all right, we have certain needs today, and we have certain needs and projects that we're doing in the future over the next 1 to 2 to 3 or however many years. And that's capacity planning. That's where you say, here's how many servers we're going to need on site. Here's how many servers we're going to need in the cloud, or whatever resources you're going to use in the cloud. And then you start planning that type of thing over a period of time, and then you start ordering the equipment you need when it's going to be needed. So it could be for special projects, or it could be for basic day-to-day services for the users in the organization. In most cases, you're going to only deploy new servers as virtual machines. Of course, you have to have host servers in order to host the virtual machines, but those are not going to be replaced as often as the virtual machines themselves. So basically, you might have 5 virtual machines today. You might need 10, 15, or 20 down the road. That means you probably need to add more capacity to your host servers, or you need additional host servers to bear that load. Capacity planning, as you see here, it has certain requirements such as adding more servers, more hardware, reducing loads, reducing the number of users that connect to a server to reduce the load. All of that is part of capacity planning. Bottlenecks. Bottlenecks have really changed over the years. In the late 90s, bottlenecks were typically the CPU, the processor. Then after that, it was the RAM. The RAM was really slow and it was really expensive, so it was hard to buy a lot of RAM. And eventually, RAM became faster and cheaper. And then it was storage. Storage was one of the last performance bottlenecks that may have finally been solved. So we had hard drives that ran at 7,200 for most servers when they purchased a server. And that is really slow. Even if you have a RAID, where you have an array of various different hard drives all running at 7,200, it'll run faster in RAID, such as RAID 0 or RAID 5, than it would as an individual server, because you're balancing that load across multiple different hard drives. However, it just wasn't fast enough. So we also had SCSI drives. The problem with SCSI drives was 15,000 RPM drives, which is more than double the 7,200 RPM drives, really were super expensive for small amounts of storage. So that wasn't really the answer. Finally, we had the answer. We started coming out with SSD, solid state drives. Those were 4 times faster than your typical 7,200 drive. And you could also get them even faster than that, depending on how much you wanted to pay. Now we have even faster SSD type drives, which really more resemble RAM than they do traditional hard drives. And those are called NVMe drives. And they're about the size of a stick of RAM, and they come in various amounts of storage. They're super fast, and you can add them into RAID, and they last a really long time, and they're just a great way to go for your servers if you can afford enough for the storage that you need. And what some people are going to do is they're going to use NVMEs possibly for their operating system, and then they're going to use SSDs or some other more traditional hard drive for their storage, because their storage they may not need for that extra speed like they would for the operating system and maybe the applications. So next in our list of bottlenecks could be the applications themselves. They might have memory leaks that use too much memory and don't collect it. That's just poor programming. You could have too many applications on a server where you don't have enough RAM to run them. That's part of capacity planning. That can cause a bottleneck. So all different types of things can cause your server to have a bottleneck. Well, you can use Performance Monitor to find out what those bottlenecks are. And here are the 4 key hardware components. They are by no means the only hardware components. They are just the most popular and important ones to look at when you look at bottlenecks. The processor, the disk, and the memory. And the one thing I haven't mentioned was network. Now, networks back in the early 2000s were running at 10 megabits. Then we got faster to 100 megabits. And then gigabit became fairly normal. Nowadays, 10 gigabit is fairly normal when you buy a server. The network interface cards are capable of 10 gigabits. The computers, like the desktops and the laptops, they come with 10 gigabits. The only problem is that the switches, the 10 gigabit switches are still really expensive, as well as the cabling. Most people have already put the cabling inside their walls, and they're only going to be capable of around 800 megabits if they're using Cat 5e, or if they're using Cat 6, it's only going to be capable of 1 gigabit. So it doesn't matter. Even if you have 10 gigabits, you're never going to see it unless you replace all that cabling as well, which can be really expensive. So in this particular case, it could be your network that is going to be a bottleneck. I don't really see that happening too often. Usually in an office of, say, 100 people in a local area network, you're not going to exceed a full gigabit of bandwidth needed. So I don't think the 10 gigabit at this time is all that important. But what we are seeing is internet speeds increasing beyond the gigabit. When that happens, then basically you're paying for something that you're not going to be getting unless you replace all of your wiring and all of your switching to match the 10 gigabit of your servers and your laptops and desktops. So when that happens, that's obviously a problem. What's the solution? Well, in my opinion, the solution would be Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is now capable of going beyond gigabit. Maybe not 10 gigabit, reliably yet, but I think it's headed that direction. So you could go ahead and replace all your wired connections, except for the ones in your server room, of course, all the ones that the clients connect to anyway, with a Wi-Fi connection. Then you can go beyond gigabit, and you don't have to worry about replacing all that wiring. We need to monitor our network infrastructure to see what's happening with the network, see what's happening with the hardware, see what's happening with the software. And it's great to do that over time, but it's also good to do that live to see what's happening. So you do have things like Performance Monitor, Task Manager, Reliability Monitor, all those different kinds of things that you can use to manage what's happening live. One of the things you're going to find when you have connectivity problems is, and this is, a lot of people say 95% of the time, of course, there's no scientific fact for that, but I do find that it's probably true, is going to be DNS. If you're having any kind of problem with speed, but you're still connected, it's just really slow, it's probably going to be domain name system, or DNS. DNS is where you resolve names to IP addresses or IP addresses to names using various different types of records. And a lot of times DNS is failing for some reason. It could be corrupt. It may not be replicating properly with other DNS servers. So you've got stale records. There's so many different things that can go wrong with DNS. Some records are missing. Some records need to be recreated. Maybe some zones, weren't created properly. And so that can cause a lot of your problems connectivity-wise if things are running slow. You might also have some firewall rules on the servers that are causing problems because it's not just the firewall out to the internet where there is a firewall. They also are included and turned on all the servers. Now, it could be the problem is with a third-party anti-malware solution that has a built-in firewall and has disabled the Windows firewall. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong just because you've got a third-party firewall running on your Windows server. It basically runs the same way as the Windows one does anyway. Sometimes it's just a shell on top of the Windows one. But you need to make sure that the ports that you need to do things like Active Directory replication and file sharing, all those different ports, they have port numbers assigned to them. So if you can't do something, you can't communicate with your server for a specific service, there's a port tied for that. You can go ahead and do a search for that online, find out what port needs to be open, make sure it's open on the server, and that a lot of times will fix your problem. In Performance Monitor, you do have a DNS monitor. So you can monitor DNS. You can use also event logs to monitor DNS. I find event logs to be the most useful because if there's a DNS error, then you'll also get that error code that goes along with it, which you can then you'll look up to see what the problem is. A lot of times, zone traffic does not properly replicate from one DNS server to another DNS server, and that definitely could be a problem. And you'll need to fix that by opening up firewall ports or fixing some sort of network issue. I remember one time one of my technicians found a problem where for some reason, certain times of the day, the client had slowness. It was fine most of the day, but certain times of the day, all of a sudden it wouldn't be. And it took them about a week to figure it out. But there was an unshielded cable. So Ethernet cables come in both shielded and unshielded. So unshielded can have electromagnetic interference with various different types of things that could block the signal. So that's why a lot of times you need to use shielded, so it's not going to have electromagnetic interference. And what ended up happening is they had an in and an out board using magnets. And so whenever the users would clock out to go to lunch, the magnet would get really close to the unshielded cable and all of a sudden cause the network traffic to become very slow because it caused a lot of packets to drop. The magnets were pulling the ones and zeros right out of the Ethernet cable. And so, like I said, it took about a week, but finally figured out that that was what was going on based on anytime someone was checking in and checking out. So once that was resolved, we replaced it with a shielded cable, and then that problem went away. Those are the kinds of things you're going to have to troubleshoot. Some real sleuthing is going to need to be done. It's going to take some time to solve a lot of these problems. You also would want to monitor virtual machines. So virtualizations have been around, of course, since Windows Server 2008 with the Hyper-V role. And of course, there's other virtualization that's been around even longer. And you need to monitor that. Of course, you can use Performance Monitor to do that. And some of the things you're going to want to monitor is going to be the GPU, which could be a discrete video card that's installed and the virtual machines are using, physical memory that's being used, minimum and maximum that's being used, things like that, to determine whether or not you need more resources. So the great thing about virtual machines is if you need more resources, you just shut the virtual machine down. You can add more processing. You can add more RAM. You can add more storage, boot it back up, and it's now faster and better. Of course, you don't want to add too much because then you're going to be taking it away from possibly other virtual machines in the future. And here are some PowerShell commandlets that do the same thing for monitoring the same way that you would be able to get through using some of the tools like Performance Monitor in your server. And of course, Windows Admin Center can also do monitoring using its various tools, which mimic the tools that are inside the Tools menu in Server Manager. Server Manager is going to be your central location. So when you boot up your server or when you start it up and log in, Server Manager just goes ahead and loads, and you can start using all those great tools in the Tools menu. You also have various other different things that are built into Server Manager, such as on the left-hand side of the screen, you can look at all your disks. You can look at certain applications that are installed, like Remote Desktop and other things like that. So Server Manager is a great jumping off point for any application-based monitoring tool. So it's not going to be web-based. It's going to be application-based. And you can open up those various different managers to find out what's going on, such as DNS management. Now, DNS also has built-in event logs that you can get inside DNS Manager, or you can just look at those event logs inside Event Viewer. And here you can monitor Active Directory, you can monitor DNS, remote access, all the different things within your event log. So every time you add in a new server role, then it shows up as an event log on the left-hand side of your event viewer. So you can look at specific event logs just for those server roles. You can customize your event viewer logs. So if you want to filter down by only certain types of messages, like you only want to look at errors, or you want to look at critical types of event logs where it's possible that the server may crash, then you can do that. You don't have to look at all the informational ones and warnings if you don't need them. You want to look at just the ones that may cause the server or certain services to go down. You can set up event log subscriptions to collect server logs from other servers into your single server where you'll be doing all this management. The problem with that is you end up seeing a massive amount of logs from all the different servers. I don't recommend this to do in an enterprise. It's really the best idea is to get that operations manager application through the System Center suite. But if you do decide to enable subscriptions, you certainly can. You can go ahead and do that by starting out with the winrm command. And then the collector computer, you go ahead and type the wec-util command. And then, of course, on the servers that are going to send that information to that server, you'll need to set that up as a subscription as well. So in this particular chapter, our final chapter of our course, we talked about Task Manager, Performance Monitor, Reliability Monitor, all these different tools, baselines, event logs that can help you troubleshoot and monitor your server to make sure it runs properly and successfully for many years to come. Thanks for being part of my class, and I look forward to seeing you in other courses in the near future.